Hey guys, it's Trey back again with another video. And in today's video, I want to do something a little bit different. Lately, we've been going over file formats, and today I want to actually take a step into the world of internet protocols. So we're going to take a look at probably the most widely used internet protocol out there, and that is HTTP. Even if you don't know what HTTP is, you have been using it. If you're watching this video, you've been using HTTP. So basically what HTTP is just a protocol. It's a way for you to access resources on the internet. So that would be this video that you're watching, or the Google web page, or anything like that. Anything that you go on your browser and you type into this bar, you're using HTTPS for the most part. All right. So as you can see here, if we look at this, this is called a URL. This whole thing is called a URL. All right. So it's a way to locate resources on the internet. So basically we're saying, hey, we want to use HTTP, and this is HTTPS in particular, and then this here is the server that you want to send the request to. All right. So this, whenever you see a .com, .org, .tv, .info, .io, anything like that, that is the server that you're going to send this to. That's the server's name. All right. And then anything after that, when you see this slash and then all this other stuff, this is the resource that you want to access on that server. Okay. So it's also called a path. So basically it's a path to the resource on this server. All right. So that's pretty much what a URL is, and that's pretty much the different parts. Okay. So we're going to be going over this, not too in depth on the actual protocol itself, but I want to show you guys how you can structure this and send it yourself without using libraries or anything like that. All right. So we're going to be writing this in Node, of course. And since this is such a simple protocol, I usually split the video out into like two different ones. I'll have like an introduction, basically explaining the protocol, or file format in the cases that we've been doing. And then I'll do an implementation video. Since this is such a simple protocol, we're just going to go ahead and do it all in one video. Before we can get into the code, I have to show you basically the structure of the request that we're going to be sending. So we're not necessarily going to set up a server. I mean, we're going to set up a server, but we're not going to worry about the server, the back end portion of it. We're just going to worry about actually sending the request from a client to the server. But I do want to set up a simple server so that we can hit the simple server and get a response. All right. Let me show you the structure of our request. Here it is down here. So you see HTTP flow. I'm going to post this link in the description so you can take a look at it if you want. But so when we send our request, we're going to have to send it in this kind of format. Okay. So the basics of the format is this first top line, which is the request line. And then after that, we're going to send a bunch of headers. For us, technically, we're only going to send one header because we're going to do the simplest HTTP request that we can do. So we'll just be sending this host header, but you can have a whole host of, well, no pun intended, but you can have a whole host of headers here. The request line is the first part. All right. And it's basically telling you what method you want to use. So with HTTP, there are a bunch of different methods that you can use. We have get, we have post, we have put. I'm not going to go through those today. We're just going to take a look at the get request. So basically we're saying, hey, get this resource from the server. And then the next part is the resource that we're getting. So here, if we were trying to get this from earlier, if we were looking at this URL and we wanted to get, we wanted to know what the resource that we were getting was, it'll be all of this right here. So starting at this slash and then all the rest of this. But so here in the example, we're just getting the root. So this is basically like, just give me the root of this server, whatever that is, which is usually just the home page. All right, and then the last part of the request line is the version of HTTP. So this is HTTP 1.1. All right, we'll pretty much do this same thing for our simple server. And then now, after the request line, we need to put our headers. So we're going to put the host here. So the host is basically this guy right here, the server that we want to hit. And for us, that'll be localhost, and we'll be using the loopback address, which is 127.0.0.1. All right. So we'll just be sending a request to our own server, the same server that we're running the client on. All right. So now that we have that out the way, we know our structure. We're just really going to need these two parts that we're going to send, and then we'll get a response back. It looks similar to this. So we'll have a response line here. which will have the version of HTTP, and then it'll have a status code, and then some status text here, okay? So 200 okay means that the request was successful, and then it also has a bunch of headers here that come back. And then after the headers, we'll have a space, like a empty line, and then the response. So here it's responding with an HTML file. For us, we're just gonna respond with some basic text. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. I've opened up Visual Studio Code here. I will be writing this in JavaScript, as I said, Node.js. The first thing we want to do is actually create a folder to hold this stuff in. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say mkdir, and I'm going to create a folder called HTTP. You can also come up here and click and, type HTTP, but I like doing everything through the command line, so feel free to do it however you want. All right, so now I'm going to change directories into this HTTP folder. And the next thing I want to do is actually set this up as an NPM repository, okay? So this is going to allow us to install packages. The way we do that is we're going to type npm init-y. All right, you have to have Node and npm installed, obviously, to do this. So if I take a look in here, now we have our package.json file. So now we know that our folder is set up to work with npm, so we can install packages. So next thing I want to do is install Express. Express is what we're going to use to create our server. Let's go ahead and install that. We'll do that by typing npm i-s express, hit enter, and that will install the packages for us. And as you can see, we now have a package -lock.json, and we also have our node modules, which is where all the installed packages will go. Next thing we need to do is create our files. So I'm going to create a server file and a client file, all right? So I'm going to say touch server.js and also client.js. Right? Now, what I want to do is create our server.js file first. Like I said, we don't really care about this file. We just need something that's going to respond to our request, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a package that I can install on Visual Studio Code. It's called Express.js for snippets, all right? And this package will allow us to set up an Express server just by typing in the snippet, okay? If you have that installed, you can type in hello world, and as you can see, it pops up. You want to use the E4 example hello world. So when you click on that, it will pretty much populate everything you need for your server. And what I'm going to do is, as you can see, these three things are highlighted. This is basically just allowing you to set a port. So I'm going to set it to 3000, and then I'm going to push tab, and that will set our port to 3000. So our server is done, all right, which is good because we really didn't want to spend too much time on that anyway. So I want to close that out. And then now let's go to the client.js where we actually want to be. For the client, we're going to use a package called net. And this comes with Node.js, so it's a built-in package. So we don't have to install anything. We just need to import it, okay? All right, so we have our net package imported, and this is what we'll be using to set up our sockets and things to actually connect to the server. The next thing we want to do is set up the server's IP and the server's port. All right, so the IP is going to allow us to connect to the server, which is this file here, and then the port is also going to allow us to connect to the server. So we need both of these pieces of information to connect. So we're using a server IP of 127.0.0.1. This is just the loopback address, and it's basically saying use this computer. That's the server I want to use. It's my computer, the computer I'm on right now. And then we're going to set the server port to 3000 because that's what we set here. So remember, we're listening on port 3000, so we want to connect to port 3000. All right, so that's why we put 3000 here. The next thing I want to do is actually set up a constant that's going to hold our request values. So if you can remember back here, remember we said we need our request to look like this, okay? So we're going to create a constant that will hold this information for us, except we're not going to be using the developer.mozilla.org. We're going to be using that loopback address, all right, as our host. I'm going to show you two ways to do this. The first way is we're going to use a function that we used in our BMP video. If you haven't seen that, you can go ahead and go back there, but it's going to be a helper function that's basically going to turn our string into an array of bytes, all right? Because when we're sending our request to the server, we need to send it as an array of bytes. And then I'm also going to show you a way to use the built-in buffer class to convert the string to an array of bytes as well. All right, so this is our string to character code function, and it basically takes in a string and it converts it to an array of bytes. All right, so here's our request buffer, and we are setting up a new uint8 array. If you're not familiar with these typed arrays, you can go ahead and Google them. So basically, it's unsigned bytes, an array of unsigned bytes. That's all it is, okay? And then we're calling our string to character code, and basically that's going to take the string that we pass in and convert it to an array, all right? So we pass in our request. So remember, we have our request line here. We have our method, which is get. We have our resource, which is the root resource, which we set in our server.js. Let me show you here. So we're requesting that. And then we have the version. So we're going to use HTTP version 1.1, all right? And then we put this \r\n. So what this is going to do is basically create a new line. And we need this in the request. When we send this to the server is going to understand this as, okay, they want a new line. All right, so we have to have this here. And then now we have our headers. So remember, we're only passing in one header, and that is going to be our host. And the host is our loopback address, which means use this computer, all right, the one that we're on right now. And then for HTTP, you have to end your request with 2 \rns. So we have our \r\n, \r\n. All right, so this is how you end the request. This is how the server will know, okay, this is the end of the request, all right? So when we send this to our server, it should respond with hello world, because it knows, okay, they're trying to send it here, and whenever we get a request to this, we want to send back just the hello world, all right? So that is all we need for our request, and that's good. And the next thing I want to do is show you how to do this using the buffer built-in class. This is how you would do it. Let me comment this out for a second so there won't be any red. But all right, so if you wanted to use the buffer from, you wouldn't need to import this. I just wanted to show you how you can do it yourself without using any built-in function. All right, so you would just do buffer.from and then pass in the exact same request, because the request is not changing. You're just changing the way you're converting the request from string to an array of bytes. All right, so I'm actually going to use my version because it's my version. I want to use that one. So I'll leave this here so you can see it if you're pulling this from GitHub. So I'll leave this here commented out, but we'll be using this one for today. All right. So at this point, we have all of our stuff set up. We know the server. We know what the request we're sending is. We're good to go for that. Now the only thing left to do is actually set up the socket and send the request. All right. So to set up the socket, we'll be using the net package, and it will look like this. We're going to set up the socket. We're going to call new net.socket, and this creates a new socket. And now that we have the socket, we need to go ahead and connect to our server. All right. So to connect, we're going to call socket.connect. We're going to pass in the server port, then the server IP, and then there's going to be a callback function. Once we connect, that's going to get called. All right. So once we connect, we actually want to write this request to the socket. So when we write the request to the socket, it's going to send it to the server, all right? And then we have to wait for a response. So let's go ahead and write the request to the socket. And we do this by calling socket.write, and then we pass in the request buffer, all right? So now this will, once we connect, it's going to write the request to the socket, all right? And now, once we actually write that request, we want to wait for the server to send a response. The way we do this is by listening for an event on the socket. So the socket will trigger an event when it receives data from the server, all right? And that event is called a data event. All right, so the way we listen is we call socket.on, and then we're listening for the data event. So anytime we get data, it's going to call this callback function, and it's going to give us the data that it received, all right? So what we want to do with this data is we want to print it out to the screen, and then for our sake, we're just going to kill the socket. So we'll just destroy the socket, all right? So we'll do that by doing console.log data.toString. So we're going to take the data, we're going to convert it to a string, and then we're going to print it out to the screen, all right? And once we do that, we're going to kill the socket. So that's all we're doing. We're sending the request, getting the response, and then killing the client. All right. So that's pretty much it for this one. Let's go ahead and actually take a look at this running. So what I want to do is here, I'm going to, in our terminal, I'm going to open up another terminal instance here. So in the first one, we're going to start our server.js. So I'm going to say node server.js. All right, and now it's saying example app listening on port 3000. And then the next thing we want to do is actually run our client and see if we get a response back. So the first thing I'm going to need to do here is, as you can see, we're not in the HTTP folder. So I'm going to change directories into there. So cd HTTP. Now we're in the HTTP folder. So I want to run this client. So the way we'll do that is we'll say node client.js. And when I hit enter, we should get the response back. And we do, as we can see. When we ran this, we sent this request here. We're getting the root resource, all right? And as you can see here in our server, the root resource is just going to return hello world. So if we scroll down to the bottom, we see that the response body has hello world. So we know we got the right response. But what is all the rest of this stuff up here, right? So basically, it's just the rest of the response. We have the HTTP version that the response is. Then we have a response status, which says 200. All right, and then we have the response text, which is okay. All right, so 200 means okay, that the request went through fine, nothing went wrong, server responded, no problems. All right, that's what 200 okay means. All right, and then underneath that line, we have a bunch of headers. That's all this is, just a bunch of response headers. It's telling you that it came from Express. It tells you what the content type is. All right, how long the content is, and all the rest of this stuff, the date. All right, and then after that, we have a space or an empty line, and then we have our actual request body. This is pretty much what we cared about. That's what we were requesting. All right, and hello world. So we see that this works, and this is basically the most basic request you can send. We have the most basic server here. It doesn't have any security or anything on it, and we're also only sending HTTP. We're not sending HTTPS, so this is not secure data that we're sending. We're sending it in plain text. All right, so it's not very secure, but this is it. We've actually written out an HTTP request, and we have received a response from the server. All right, so that's pretty much it for this one. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe to the channel and all that jazz, and I will see you guys in the next video.